My family always called me the slow one, the disappointment who barely scraped through high school. But they had no idea I was secretly the youngest dean in Thornfield University's 150-year history, commanding a salary that dwarfed all of theirs combined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For 32 years, I endured their constant ridicule. Every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every casual phone call became another opportunity for them to remind me of my supposed intellectual inferiority. My sister, Delphine, the self-proclaimed family genius with her accounting degree from Riverside Community College, never missed a chance to lecture me about practical intelligence. My brother Garrison, who managed a local hardware store, would shake his head in mock disappointment whenever my name came up in conversation. And my mother, Constance Whitmore, treated me like the family charity case, the daughter who needed constant guidance because she clearly lacked the mental capacity to navigate life independently. Beatrice, sweetie, she'd say in that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate, maybe you should consider something simpler. Not everyone is cut out for complex thinking. The way she'd pause before saying complex thinking, as if the very concept was too advanced from my comprehension, still makes my stomach clench with remembered humiliation. It all started in elementary school, at Willowbrook Academy in the quaint town of Ravenshire. I was a quiet child, more interested in losing myself in books than participating in classroom discussions. While other children raised their hands eagerly to answer questions, I preferred to observe, to listen, to absorb information quietly. My teachers misinterpreted my silence as slowness, my thoughtfulness as confusion. Beatrice seems to struggle with basic concepts, Mrs. Pembridge wrote in my third-grade report card. She would benefit from additional support and perhaps lowered expectations. That single comment became the foundation upon which my family built their perception of me. From that moment forward, I was branded as the special needs child, the one who required extra patience and simplified explanations. The labeling only intensified as I grew older. When I chose to spend summers reading philosophy and literature instead of getting typical teenage jobs, Delphine would roll her eyes. There goes Beatrice again, pretending to understand those big books. She just stares at the pages and pretends to read. It's actually kind of sad. Garrison was even crueler. During family barbecues, he'd introduce me to his friends as my sister, the space cadet. He'd ruffle my hair like I was a beloved but simple-minded pet. Don't mind Beatrice, he'd say with a chuckle. She's harmless, just lives in her own little world. We're not sure she fully grasps reality, but we love her anyway. The worst part wasn't their direct insults. It was their performative kindness. The way they'd speak to me like I was a fragile, mentally challenged relative who needed constant protection from life's complexities. They'd explain simple concepts to me with exaggerated patience, use smaller words when addressing me, and exchange knowing glances when they thought I wasn't looking. When I announced I was applying to colleges, the family reaction was predictably condescending. "That's wonderful that you want to try, dear," Mother said, patting my hand gently. "But perhaps we should also look into some alternative options. There are lovely trade schools that might be more suitable for your learning style." Delphine was more direct. "Beatrice, I say this with love, but you barely made it through high school. College is demanding. It requires critical thinking skills and analytical abilities that not everyone possesses. Maybe consider cosmetology school. You've always been good with your hands." Even when I was accepted to Thornfield University, a prestigious institution known for its rigorous academic standards, they found ways to diminish my achievement. "They must have really lowered their standards," Garrison muttered. "Or maybe they need to fill some sort of quota. Either way, don't get your hopes up too high, B. College is nothing like high school." What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that I hadn't just been accepted to Thornfield University, I had been recruited. My application essay, a complex analysis of postmodern philosophical frameworks in contemporary education theory, had so impressed the admissions committee that they'd called me personally. My standardized test scores placed me in the 99th percentile. My recommendation letters described me as exceptionally gifted and intellectually extraordinary. But I kept this information to myself. Years of being dismissed had taught me the value of strategic silence. I learned to hide my achievements, to downplay my capabilities, to exist in the shadows of their expectations. It was easier than fighting their preconceived notions, easier than enduring their disbelief and skepticism. Throughout my undergraduate years, then graduate school, then my doctoral program, I maintained this facade of mediocrity. I'd come home for holidays and listen to their continued jokes about my little school projects and my cute attempts at being intellectual. They never asked about my grades, never inquired about my research, never showed the slightest curiosity about my academic journey. And now, at 32, I held one of the most prestigious positions in higher education. Dr. Beatrice Ashford, Dean of Advanced Studies at Thornfield University, youngest person ever to hold such a position, author of 3 groundbreaking books on educational philosophy, and keynote speaker at international academic conferences. But to my family, I was still just poor Beatrice, the family disappointment who somehow managed to cling to her little teaching job at the local university. That was about to change dramatically. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing tenure applications in my office at Thornfield University. The mahogany nameplate on my desk read, Dr. Beatrice Ashford, Dean of Advanced Studies. But the voice on the other end of the line transported me back to feeling like that dismissed child they'd always seen me as. Beatrice, honey, we have wonderful news, Mother's voice practically sang through the receiver. Delphine's daughter, Camilla, just got accepted to Thornfield University. Can you believe it? Our little genius is following in well, she's going to that school where you work. I set down my Mont Blanc pen, a gift from the Board of Trustees after my recent promotion, and leaned back in my leather chair. Through my corner office window, I could see students crossing the quad, backpacks slung over their shoulders, heading to classes in buildings that bore the names of benefactors whose donations I'd personally secured. That's wonderful news about Camilla, I replied carefully. Thornfield is an excellent institution. Oh, we know, Mother gushed. Delphine is beside herself with pride. A real university, not like those community colleges. This is the big leagues. Anyway, we're having a family celebration dinner this Saturday, and we'd love for you to come. Delphine specifically requested you be there. My stomach tightened with familiar dread. Family gatherings were orchestrated performances where I played the role of the lovably simple sister, nodding along while they discussed topics they assumed were beyond my comprehension. But something in Mother's tone suggested this would be different, more pointed, more deliberately humiliating. Of course I'll be there, I heard myself saying, already regretting the commitment. Perfect! And Beatrice, dear, could you do us a tiny favor? Since you work at Thornfield in whatever capacity, could you maybe put in a good word for Camilla, help her get settled, show her around campus? I know you're probably just in some sort of administrative role, but surely you have some connections there. The irony was so thick, I nearly choked. I was literally the person who would be overseeing Camilla's academic experience, the dean who'd have final approval on her major requirements, the administrator whose recommendation could make or break her graduate school applications. But in their minds, I was still just Beatrice who works at the university somewhere. I'll see what I can do, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. You're such a sweetheart. Oh, and one more thing. Delphine wondered if you could maybe ask around for scholarships. I know it's probably above your pay grade, but maybe you know someone who knows someone? We're so proud of Camilla, but you know how expensive these fancy schools can be. I stared at my computer screen where an email notification showed a message from the provost asking for my input on the university's new $50 million scholarship endowment, a fund I'd helped design and would be personally administrating. I'll look into it, I managed. Wonderful! See you Saturday at 6. Oh, and Beatrice tried to dress nicely. Delphine's invited some of her professional colleagues, people from the bank where she works. We want to make a good impression, and you know how you sometimes look a bit disheveled? The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the elegant office I'd earned through years of academic excellence they couldn't even fathom. My diplomas hung on the wall behind me. Bachelor's degree magna cum laude, master's with highest honors, PhD with distinction, postdoctoral fellowship certificates from Oxford and Yale. My bookshelf contained not just my own published works, but personal inscriptions from Nobel laureates who considered me a colleague and intellectual equal. But Mother was worried I'd look disheveled in front of Delphine's banker friends. I walked to the window and looked down on the campus I helped govern. Students hurried between classes, some heading to lecture halls where they'd learn from professors I'd personally hired, others walking towards dormitories where they lived under policies I'd helped craft. The bronze statue of Thornfield's founder stood in the center of the quad, and I remembered the speech I'd given at its dedication ceremony last spring, addressing an audience of trustees, alumni, and distinguished faculty. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Dean Ashford, the president's office called to confirm your 3 o'clock meeting about the new International Studies program. Thank you, Patricia. Please also pull the files on incoming freshman academic support services. I need to review our mentorship programs. Of course. Should I also prepare the scholarship allocation reports you requested? Yes, and add the Whitmore file to that stack. I paused, realizing I'd used my family name. Actually, let me handle that one personally. As Patricia's footsteps faded down the hallway, I returned to my desk and opened my laptop. Camilla Whitmore's application file appeared on the screen. Test scores, transcripts, recommendation letters, financial aid requests, everything my family had asked me to look into was literally at my fingertips, awaiting my personal approval or denial. I scrolled through her academic record. Solid grades, respectable test scores, decent extracurricular activities. She was a good student, certainly qualified for admission, but nothing extraordinary. In fact, her profile was remarkably similar to hundreds of other incoming freshmen, competent, but unremarkable. The same family who'd spent decades telling me I lacked the intelligence for complex thinking was now celebrating their little genius whose academic achievements were perfectly average by Thornfield standards. I closed the laptop and picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found what I was looking for. Dr. Harrison Blackthorne, President, Thornfield University. We had lunch scheduled for Thursday to discuss the university's strategic plan for the next decade. Saturday's dinner was going to be interesting. They expected their simple, confused Beatrice to show up and humbly request favors for their precious Camilla. They had no idea they were about to dine with the woman who could either make their daughter's college experience extraordinary or ensure it remained utterly ordinary. But first, I needed to decide exactly how I wanted to handle this revelation. The strategic part of my mind, the part they'd never recognized existed, began calculating possibilities. The question wasn't whether I had the power to help Camilla. The question was whether I was finally ready to show my family exactly who they'd been underestimating for 32 years. Saturday evening arrived with the familiar dread that accompanied every Whitmore family gathering. I stood in front of my walk-in closet, selecting my outfit with deliberate care. The black Armani blazer I'd worn to last month's Board of Trustees meeting, too obviously expensive. The silk blouse from my recent conference in Geneva, they'd never believe I could afford it on what they assumed was my modest salary. Instead, I chose a simple navy dress from 3 seasons ago, professional but unremarkable, the kind of outfit that would allow me to blend into the background while they performed their familiar ritual of intellectual superiority.
The Whitmore family home in Millbrook Heights hadn't changed much since my childhood. Same faded wallpaper in the foyer, same creaky floorboard by the kitchen entrance, same overpowering scent of Mother's lavender potpourri. But tonight felt different. Tonight, there were additional cars in the driveway, Delphine's colleagues, no doubt, invited to witness the family celebration of their real academic achiever. "Beatrice!" Delphine's voice rang out as I entered the living room. She swept toward me with theatrical enthusiasm, her arms outstretched. "Look, everyone, my brilliant little sister is here." The sarcasm in her voice was subtle, but unmistakable. Around the room, I counted 8 additional guests, well-dressed professionals, clutching wine glasses, their expressions politely curious as they sized up the family oddball they'd no doubt heard about. "Delphine tells us you work at Thornfield University," said a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and sharp blue eyes. "That's exciting. Are you in the cafeteria services or perhaps facilities management?" The assumption hit me like a familiar slap. Before I could respond, Garrison appeared at my elbow, chuckling as he handed me a glass of wine. "Oh, Beatrice works in some sort of, administrative capacity. We're never quite sure what she does there, are we, Bea? Something with paperwork, right?" "Actually," I began, but Mother's voice cut through the conversation like a dinner bell. "Everyone, please take your seats. We have so much to celebrate tonight." The dining room table had been set with Mother's best china, the wedding set she only brought out for special occasions. I found myself seated between Garrison's wife, Priscilla, and one of Delphine's banking colleagues, a portly man named Douglas, who immediately launched into an explanation of municipal bond strategies, speaking slowly and using hand gestures as if I were a child learning basic mathematics. "You see, Beatrice," Douglas explained, cutting his roast beef into precise squares, "municipal bonds are a type of investment where the government borrows money from citizens. It's quite complex, but essentially, you loan money to the city and they pay you back with interest. Do you understand the concept of interest?" I nodded politely, refraining from mentioning that I'd just approved a $12 million municipal bond package for Thornfield's new research facility expansion, or that I'd spent the previous Thursday in a meeting with the mayor discussing the economic impact of university investments on local infrastructure. "Beatrice has always struggled with financial concepts," Delphine announced from across the table, her voice carrying that familiar tone of fond exasperation. "Numbers just aren't her strong suit. Remember in high school when she couldn't balance her own checkbook?" Laughter rippled around the table, not cruel laughter, but the kind reserved for beloved family pets who've done something amusing. I felt my cheeks flush, not with embarrassment, but with a growing anger that threatened to boil over. "But that's perfectly fine," Mother interjected brightly. "Everyone has different gifts. Beatrice has always been very creative, very artistic. That's wonderful, too, in its own way." "Creative?" asked the silver-haired woman. "Are you an artist, dear?" "She writes, don't you, Beatrice? Little stories and things. It's quite sweet, really." The irony was suffocating. My little stories and things included peer-reviewed articles in the Journal of Higher Education, a chapter in Oxford University Press's anthology on modern pedagogical theory, and a book proposal that Harvard University Press had been courting for 6 months.
"Writing is such a nice hobby," Douglas nodded approvingly. "Very therapeutic. I've heard it's particularly beneficial for people with learning difficulties. Helps organize thoughts, doesn't it?" "Speaking of organizing thoughts," Delphine said, rising from her chair with a wine glass in hand, "I'd like to propose a toast to our family's newest scholar, my brilliant daughter Camilla." Everyone raised their glasses as Delphine beamed with maternal pride. "Camilla has been accepted to Thornfield University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the state. She's going to study international business, and we just know she's going to excel." "Hear, hear," Douglas cheered. "A Whitmore finally cracking the Ivy League." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. A Whitmore finally cracking the Ivy League. as if my own PhD from Yale, my postdoctoral fellowship from Oxford, my current position overseeing academic standards at an institution consistently ranked among the nation's top universities, as if none of that counted, because they'd never bothered to actually learn what I'd accomplished. "Tell us about the acceptance process, Camilla," Mother urged, turning toward my 19-year-old niece, who sat at the head of the table like a conquering hero. "It must have been so competitive." Camilla, a pleasant enough girl with Delphine's sharp features and Garrison's tendency towards smugness, launched into a detailed account of her application process. Her SAT scores, respectable but not exceptional by Thornfield standards. Her essay topic, a predictable piece about overcoming adversity through volunteer work. Her extracurricular activities, standard fare for college-bound students. The admissions counselor said my application really stood out. They said they don't usually accept students with my exact profile, but something about my personal statement really impressed them. I nearly choked on my wine. I'd read Camilla's personal statement myself just 3 days ago. It was competent but unremarkable, exactly the kind of essay that would normally result in a polite rejection letter. Her acceptance had nothing to do with standing out and everything to do with Thornfield's commitment to geographic diversity and her rural high school's underrepresented status in our applicant pool. "We're just so proud," Delphine continued, her eyes glistening with tears. "Finally, someone in this family is going to achieve real academic distinction, someone with the intellectual capacity to truly excel in higher education." The conversation continued around me as they discussed Camilla's potential majors, her dormitory assignment, her course load. Douglas offered unsolicited advice about study habits. The silver-haired woman shared anecdotes about her own son's college experience. Garrison pontificated about the importance of practical education versus theoretical knowledge. And through it all, they continued to speak about me as if I weren't there. Or worse, as if I were incapable of understanding their sophisticated discourse about university life. "Beatrice," Mother said suddenly, turning her attention to me with that familiar, patronizing smile, "didn't you mention you might be able to help Camilla get settled at Thornfield? Maybe introduce her to some people in the office where you work?" 8 pairs of eyes turned toward me expectantly. They wanted their simple, confused Beatrice to humbly offer whatever meager assistance her lowly position might provide. They expected gratitude for being included in their celebration, appreciation for being asked to contribute in whatever small way I could manage. Instead, I set down my wine glass and looked directly at my niece. "Actually, Camilla," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I think we should definitely arrange a meeting. There are several things we need to discuss about your academic program." The phrasing was subtle but specific, not "I'll try to help" or "maybe I can ask around." Several things we need to discuss. The language of authority, of decision-making power. But the subtlety was lost on them entirely. They heard what they expected to hear. Their simple sister Beatrice offering to do whatever small favors her insignificant position might allow. I smiled and took another sip of wine, already planning exactly how that meeting would unfold. The conversation around the dinner table grew more animated as the wine flowed and inhibitions lowered. What had started as polite celebration was rapidly transforming into something far more sinister, a systematic dismantling of my perceived capabilities performed for the entertainment of Delphine's professional colleagues. "You know what would be absolutely perfect," Delphine announced, her cheeks flushed from her 3rd glass of Chardonnay. "Since Beatrice works at Thornfield, she could keep an eye on Camilla, make sure she doesn't get into any trouble, help her navigate the
complexities of university life. Douglas nodded enthusiastically, gesturing with his fork. Brilliant idea! Having a family member on staff, even in a support role, could be invaluable. Beatrice could probably get insider information about which professors are easiest, which classes to avoid, that sort of thing. Oh, but we'd need to be careful, Mother interjected, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We wouldn't want Camilla's academic reputation to be affected by association. You understand. The implication hung in the air like smoke. They were worried that my perceived intellectual limitations might somehow taint Camilla's university experience, that her brilliant future could be damaged simply by being related to the family disappointment. Priscilla leaned forward, her eyes bright with wine and malicious curiosity. Beatrice, dear, what exactly do you do at the university? I mean, specifically. We've never really understood your job description.
All conversations stopped. 8 expectant faces turned toward me, waiting for confirmation of what they'd always assumed, that I held some menial position befitting my supposed intellectual capacity. I work in academic administration, I replied carefully. But what kind of administration? The silver-haired woman pressed. Are you a secretary? File clerk? Surely you can be more specific. Garrison laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. Come on, Bea, don't be modest. Tell them about your important paperwork duties, your filing responsibilities. The mockery in his voice was undisguised now. He was performing for the audience, demonstrating his superiority over his simple-minded sister for the amusement of Delphine's sophisticated friends. Actually, Camilla spoke up for the first time since her acceptance speech, her voice carrying a note of genuine concern. Maybe Aunt Beatrice shouldn't get too involved. I mean, no offense, but I don't want other students to think I'm, connected to the support staff. It might affect how professors see me. The words hit me like ice water. My own niece, the girl whose university acceptance I personally approved, whose financial aid package I had enhanced, whose academic future rested literally in my hands, was embarrassed by the prospect of being associated with me. Camilla makes an excellent point, Delphine said approvingly. We want her to succeed on her own merits, not rely on favors from family connections in lower-level positions. Exactly, Mother chimed in. Camilla is brilliant enough to excel without needing special assistance. She's not like... She trailed off, but the implication was crystal clear. Douglas raised his wineglass again. To Camilla's independence, may she achieve everything her natural intelligence deserves. As they toasted my niece's brilliance and independence, I felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. These people, my own family, had spent decades convincing themselves that I was intellectually inferior, but now they were asking me to use whatever pathetic influence I might possess to benefit their golden child, while simultaneously expressing shame at being connected to me. They wanted my help, but were embarrassed by my existence. Of course, I said quietly, if Camilla would prefer to navigate Thornfield entirely on her own merit, I completely respect that decision. Oh, no, Delphine backtracked quickly, realizing she might have just eliminated a potential advantage for her daughter. We didn't mean she shouldn't accept any help at all, just discreet help. Behind-the-scenes assistance that wouldn't draw attention to the family connection. Yes, Mother agreed. Beatrice could quietly look out for Camilla without making it obvious. Maybe help her avoid mistakes that could hurt her grades. You know how challenging university can be for everyone, but especially for someone as ambitious as Camilla. The silver-haired woman leaned back in her chair, studying me with calculating eyes. Tell me, Beatrice, how long have you been working at Thornfield? 12 years.
In the same position, Douglas asked, suggesting that such stagnation confirmed their assumptions about my limitations. No promotions, no advancement. There have been some changes to my responsibilities over time, I said carefully. Garrison snorted. That's Beatrice's diplomatic way of saying they've probably shuffled her between different filing cabinets, right, Bea? Maybe from student records to faculty paperwork? The laughter that followed was genuinely cruel now. These people, strangers who knew nothing about me except what my family had told them, were openly mocking my perceived career stagnation. Actually, Priscilla said with sudden inspiration, maybe this is perfect. Beatrice has been there so long, she probably knows all the ins and outs of the system, all the shortcuts and loopholes, things that could really benefit Camilla. What kind of shortcuts? Camilla asked, her interest clearly piqued. Oh, Delphine waved her hand vaguely. Ways to get into closed classes, how to appeal bad grades, which administrators might be flexible about deadlines and requirements. I stared at her in disbelief. They weren't just asking me to provide guidance or mentorship. They were asking me to help Camilla cheat the system, to use my presumed low-level access to circumvent the very academic standards I had helped establish. I think there might be some misunderstanding about what Oh, don't be so modest, Mother interrupted. We know you'd do anything to help family. And really, it's not like we're asking you to do anything illegal, just creative problem solving. Exactly, Douglas agreed. Every system has its inefficiencies. People in your position often develop workarounds that people in authority positions never learn about. The condescension was suffocating. They had constructed an entire narrative about my role at the university, a narrative that positioned me as a low-level functionary whose only value lay in my ability to help them circumvent legitimate academic processes. Think about it, Beatrice. This is your chance to really contribute to the family, to do something meaningful with your unique position. And if Camilla succeeds, it reflects well on all of us. The Whitmore family finally has someone who can compete at the highest academic levels. There it was again, finally, as if my own achievements were invisible, non-existent, irrelevant to the family's intellectual legacy. I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA but understood nothing about my actual life. They wanted my help while denying my worth. They expected my loyalty while expressing shame at our connection. They demanded my assistance while dismissing my achievements.
And they had no idea, absolutely no conception, that the support staff member they were asking to bend the rules was actually the person who had written most of those rules in the first place. You know what? I said, setting down my napkin with deliberate precision. I think I need to give this some serious thought. The university takes academic integrity very seriously, and I want to make sure any assistance I provide is completely appropriate. The word choice was intentional. Academic integrity. The language of policy, of institutional authority. But they heard only what they expected to hear, their simple sister expressing admirable caution about breaking minor rules. Of course, dear, Mother said approvingly, we wouldn't want you to get in trouble with your supervisors. Just think creatively. I'm sure there are ways to help that wouldn't put your job at risk. I smiled and nodded, already composing the conversation I would have with Camilla on Monday morning. It was going to be a very educational meeting for both of us. The dinner continued for another torturous hour, each passing minute adding new layers to my family's assumptions about my incompetence and their expectations for my complicity in academic fraud. By the time dessert arrived, Mother's famous apple pie served on her second-best china, the conversation had devolved into an open planning session for how I might best serve as Camilla's inside accomplice.
The key thing, Douglas explained while cutting his pie into geometric precision, is understanding the bureaucracy. Every institution has pressure points, administrators who can be persuaded, deadlines that can be extended, requirements that can be interpreted flexibly. Exactly, Delphine agreed enthusiastically. Beatrice has been there 12 years. She must know which people have real power and which ones are just figureheads. I nearly choked on my coffee. If only they knew that I was quite literally the figurehead they were referring to, the person whose signature appeared on policy documents, whose approval was required for major academic decisions, whose recommendation could open or close doors throughout the entire university system. Camilla leaned forward with the eager expression of someone who believed she was about to receive insider trading tips. Aunt Beatrice, what about grade appeals? Like, if I get a professor who doesn't appreciate my writing style or who has unrealistic expectations. The question revealed everything I needed to know about Camilla's character and her family's influence on her academic philosophy. She hadn't even started her first semester, yet she was already strategizing about how to circumvent consequences for poor performance. Grade appeals are complex, I said carefully. They require substantial justification and go through multiple levels of review. But you must know who sits on those review committees. People in administrative positions always know the real decision makers. Garrison nodded sagely, as if he understood the intricate workings of university governance from his vast experience managing a hardware store. It's all about relationships, right, B? You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Academic politics must work the same way. Academic politics, I repeated, tasting the irony. These people were discussing academic politics with someone who had navigated 15 years of faculty senate meetings, budget negotiations with state legislators, and delicate diplomatic conversations with major donors whose contributions kept the university running. What about housing? Mother asked suddenly. Surely Beatrice could arrange for Camilla to get one of the nicer dormitories, the ones with better facilities, quieter study environments. Oh yes, Priscilla clapped her hands together. That would make such a difference. Some of those dorms are practically slums. Camilla deserves better accommodations. I thought about the housing allocation system I had helped redesign 3 years ago, a merit-based process that considered academic achievement, financial need, and special circumstances. Camilla's application had been processed through the standard freshman housing lottery, which had assigned her to Riverside Hall, actually one of the newest, well-maintained dormitories with excellent study facilities. Riverside Hall is quite nice, I commented. But not the nicest, Delphine countered. What about those fancy suites in the honors building? Camilla's grades certainly qualify her for honors housing. They didn't, actually. Camilla's high school GPA, while respectable, fell well below the threshold for automatic honors program admission. Her standardized test scores were similarly adequate, but unremarkable. She was a perfectly fine student, but not the academic prodigy her family believed her to be. Honors housing has specific eligibility requirements. Requirements that can certainly be interpreted creatively, Douglas suggested with a knowing wink, especially by someone who understands how the system really works. The conversation was becoming surreal. These people were asking me to corrupt the very academic standards I had spent my career upholding, while simultaneously expressing complete confidence that my low-level position made such corruption both possible and appropriate. You know what would be really helpful? Camilla said suddenly, her eyes bright with inspiration. If I could get advanced copies of syllabi and reading lists. That way I could start preparing over the summer, maybe even begin research on major assignments. Brilliant, Mother exclaimed. That's exactly the kind of inside information that could give Camilla a real advantage. And it's not technically cheating, Garrison added with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he had found a moral loophole. Just enhanced preparation.
I stared at my niece across the table. She was asking me to provide her with confidential academic materials, syllabi that professors hadn't yet finalized, assignments that were still being developed, reading lists that might change before the semester began. She wanted to enter her first semester of college with an unfair advantage over every other freshman, obtained through family connections and institutional manipulation. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate," I said quietly. "Oh, don't be such a rule follower," Delphine laughed, her voice edged with frustration. "This is family we're talking about. Sometimes you have to be willing to bend a few minor regulations to help the people you love." "Minor regulations," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Exactly," the silver-haired woman agreed. "Academic institutions are notorious for their ridiculous bureaucracy. Everyone knows that truly smart people find ways to work around the system rather than being trapped by it." The assumption was staggering. They believed that circumventing academic integrity policies was evidence of intelligence, while following them indicated intellectual limitation. In their worldview, I was too simple-minded to understand that rules were meant to be broken by clever people. "Besides," Priscilla added with casual cruelty, "it's not like you'd be risking much. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? They fire someone from whatever it is you do there. You could probably find another filing job somewhere else." The dismissal in her voice was complete. My career, my life's work, was so inconsequential in their minds that losing it would barely register as an inconvenience. "Think about it this way, Beatrice," Mother said, with the tone she had used when I was 5 years old and reluctant to share my toys. "This is your chance to finally contribute something meaningful to the family, to use your position, however modest, to help someone with real potential succeed." However modest, real potential. I looked around the table at these people who shared my genes but possessed no understanding of my actual capabilities or achievements. They were asking me to risk my reputation, my career, my integrity to provide their mediocre daughter with unearned advantages while simultaneously expressing embarrassment about being associated with me. "I need to think about this," I said, standing from the table with sudden resolution. "Of course, dear," Mother replied approvingly. "Take your time to figure out the safest way to help. We wouldn't want you to get into any trouble with your supervisors." As I gathered my purse and prepared to leave, Camilla caught my arm. "Aunt Beatrice," she whispered urgently, "you will help me, won't you? This is really important to me. I want to make the family proud." I looked into my niece's earnest young face and saw not malicious intent, but the product of a family system that had taught her to expect special treatment, to believe that rules applied differently to people like her, to assume that academic success could be purchased through connections rather than earned through effort. "We'll definitely need to have a conversation," I told her. "Why don't you come see me in my office on Monday morning? We can discuss your academic plans in detail." "Perfect," she beamed. "Should I ask for you at the main desk, or do you have a direct number?" I handed her my business card without a word and watched her eyes scan the elegant university letterhead, the embossed seal, the carefully formatted contact information. But the title beneath my name might as well have been invisible. She saw only what she expected to see. "Monday morning, then," I said, and walked out into the cool evening air, leaving behind the wreckage of a family dinner that had finally, irrevocably, shown me exactly where I stood in their estimation. The drive home gave me 45 minutes to process what had just occurred and to plan exactly how Monday morning's meeting would unfold. By the time I reached my townhouse, I had made a decision that would change everything. They wanted to see what their simple family member could accomplish when properly motivated. They were about to find out. The weekend passed in a strange haze of anticipation and planning. I spent Saturday night in my home office, surrounded by the artifacts of my actual career,
framed photographs from academic conferences where I delivered keynote addresses, letters of recognition from international educational organizations, advanced copies of journals featuring my research. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. In this room, I was Dr. Beatrice Ashford, respected academic leader. 20 miles away, my family was probably still discussing their disappointment of a daughter and her humble filing job. Sunday morning brought clarity. I sat in my garden with coffee and the newspaper, watching sunrise paint the sky pink and gold, and made peace with what I was about to do. For 32 years, I had allowed their perception of me to remain unchallenged. I had hidden my achievements to avoid their disbelief, minimized my success to prevent their resentment, and accepted their condescension to maintain family harmony. But their request that I help Camilla cheat, their assumption that my low-level position made academic fraud both possible and appropriate, had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. They weren't just disrespecting me anymore. They were asking me to betray everything I had worked to build.
Monday morning arrived with unusual weight. I dressed carefully, selecting my most authoritative outfit, a charcoal gray suit from Brooks Brothers that I'd worn to address the State Board of Education, paired with the pearl necklace that had been a gift from the university's Board of Trustees. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, a senior academic administrator with the power to shape young lives and institutional policy. Patricia greeted me with her usual efficiency as I entered the administrative wing of Thornfield's main building. "Good morning, Dean Ashford. Your 10 o'clock appointment is here early, Miss Camilla Whitmore. She's waiting in the reception area." "Thank you, Patricia. Please show her to my office in 5 minutes. And, Patricia, I'll need you to pull Miss Whitmore's complete academic file, including her financial aid package and housing assignment. Also, please prepare a standard academic integrity policy packet, the one we give to students who've been referred for disciplinary review." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded professionally. "Of course, Dean. Should I also prepare the academic probation documentation?" "Not yet. Let's see how the meeting goes first." I settled behind my desk and reviewed Camilla's file one final time. Her high school transcript revealed a solid but unremarkable academic record, mostly B's with occasional A's in easier courses, and a concerning pattern of grade appeals in her junior year when she'd struggled with advanced placement classes. Her college entrance essay was competent but generic, her extracurricular activities standard, her recommendation letters polite but unenthusiastic. This was the brilliant family member they believed would finally bring academic distinction to the Whitmore name. Patricia's gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. "Miss Whitmore is here, Dean." "Please send her in." Camilla entered my office with the confident stride of someone who believed she was meeting with a sympathetic family member in a minor administrative role. She wore designer jeans and a Thornfield University sweatshirt that she'd probably purchased online, her long blonde hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. Her smile was bright and expectant, the expression of someone anticipating good news. "Aunt Beatrice," she exclaimed, moving toward my desk with arms outstretched for a hug. "This office is so much nicer than I expected. You must be more important than you let on." I remained seated, gesturing toward the chair across from my desk. "Please have a seat, Miss Whitmore. We have quite a bit to discuss." The formality in my voice stopped her mid-stride. Her smile faltered slightly as she noticed my posture, professional, authoritative, decidedly un-aunt-like. But she recovered quickly, settling into the chair with a nervous laugh. "Miss Whitmore, come on, we're family. You don't have to be so formal." "Actually," I said, opening her file and spreading the documents across my desk, "when we're discussing your academic career at this university, formality is exactly what's required. You are a Thornfield University student, and I am a Thornfield University administrator. Our family relationship is irrelevant to your academic standing here." Camilla's confidence wavered. She glanced around my office, seeming to notice for the first time the diplomas on the walls, the professional awards, and photographs of me with university dignitaries and government officials. Her gaze lingered on the nameplate that clearly read Dean before returning to my face with growing uncertainty. I'm not sure I understand. Mom said you worked in administration, but I thought... You thought what, exactly? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. I thought you were like a secretary or something, someone who processes paperwork and files documents. Her voice grew smaller with each word as the reality of the situation began to penetrate. I see. And based on that assumption, you came here this morning expecting what, precisely? Patricia's face flushed pink. Well, Mom and I discussed... the family thought maybe you could help me with some things. You know, since you work here and understand how the system operates. What kind of help? I pressed, leaning back in my chair. Just guidance. Maybe some insider information about which classes are easier, which professors to avoid, how to appeal grades if I run into problems. The words tumbled out faster now, as if speed somehow made them sound less inappropriate. And housing? I prompted. Didn't your mother mention something about arranging better accommodations? Oh, yes. If there's any way to get into the honors dormitory, that would be amazing. I know I'm supposed to be in Riverside Hall, but honestly, I think I deserve better facilities. My grades were really good in high school. I pulled out her transcript and placed it where she could see it. Your high school GPA was 3.2. Your SAT scores were in the 60th percentile. Your class rank was 47th out of 186 students. Each statistic landed like a stone in still water. These are adequate credentials for admission to Thornfield, Miss Whitmore, but they are not exceptional by any measure. But she started to protest. Furthermore, I continued, honors housing is reserved for students who demonstrate academic excellence, not for those who believe they deserved special treatment due to family connections. The color drained from Camilla's face. Family connections? What are you talking about? I stood and walked to the window, giving her a moment to process while I chose my words carefully. When I turned back, her expression had shifted from confusion to something approaching fear. Miss Whitmore, let me explain something about academic integrity at this university. We take it very seriously. Students who attempt to gain unfair advantages through personal connections, who seek to circumvent established policies, or who engage in any form of academic dishonesty face immediate disciplinary action. I didn't mean... Her voice was barely a whisper now. What exactly did you think you were asking for this morning? I asked, returning to my seat. Be specific. I just wanted some help navigating the system. Everyone says college is really hard, and I thought maybe you could give me some advice about how to succeed. And advance copies of syllabi? Access to assignment descriptions before they're distributed to other students? Assistance with grade appeals that haven't happened yet? Each question hit its mark, and I watched understanding dawn in her eyes. Oh my God, she breathed. You're not a secretary, are you? I handed her one of my business cards, the official ones with the university seal, not the simple contact information I'd given her Saturday night. She stared at it for a long moment, her lips moving silently as she read, Dr. Beatrice Ashford, Dean of Advanced Studies. Dean, she repeated, the word falling from her lips like a confession. You're a dean. You're my dean. That's correct. I oversee academic standards, policy implementation, and disciplinary procedures for this university. I approve or deny appeals, review cases of academic misconduct, and make decisions about student standing that can affect entire academic careers. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. Camilla sat, frozen in her chair, her face cycling through emotions, embarrassment, fear, disbelief, and dawning horror at what she had just asked a senior university administrator to do for her. I think, I said finally, we need to have a very different conversation than the one you were expecting when you walked in here this morning. The silence in my office stretched like a taut wire. Camilla sat frozen in the leather chair, staring at my business card as if it might transform into something less threatening. Her face had gone from pink embarrassment to ashen realization, and I could practically see her mental gears grinding as she processed the magnitude of her miscalculation. I need you to understand something very clearly, Miss Whitmore, I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd spent years developing in faculty meetings and disciplinary hearings. What you've just requested constitutes multiple violations of university policy, academic fraud, abuse of institutional resources, and solicitation of preferential treatment based on personal relationships. Her hands trembled as she set the business card on my desk. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who you were. My family. They said you worked here, but they never told me you were this. And if I had been a secretary or file clerk, would that have made your requests appropriate? Would my lower status have justified asking me to compromise my integrity and risk my career for your benefit? The question hit home. Camilla's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as she grappled with the implications. She had been perfectly comfortable asking someone she perceived as powerless to break rules for her convenience. But faced with actual authority, her confidence had evaporated entirely. No, of course not. I thought... She trailed off, unable to articulate a defense that didn't expose her fundamental assumptions about privilege and entitlement. I thought that people in service positions exist to circumvent policies for your benefit. You thought that family connections should supersede merit-based systems. You thought that academic achievement could be purchased through insider access rather than earned through effort. Each statement landed like a hammer blow. Camilla shrank deeper into her chair, tears forming in her eyes. But I wasn't finished yet. This conversation was about more than just correcting my niece's misconceptions. It was about addressing 32 years of family assumptions that had shaped her worldview. Tell me about your family's expectations for your university experience. What did they tell you about how to succeed here? They said... Camilla's voice was barely audible. They said I was brilliant, that I deserved to be here more than most students, that my intelligence would set me apart. And when they learned you'd been accepted to Thornfield, how did they react? They were so proud. They said finally someone in the family was achieving real academic distinction. She paused, a new understanding flickering in her eyes. They said, finally, as if no one in the family had ever achieved academic distinction before. Yes, exactly. Camilla looked up at me with dawning comprehension. But you're a dean. You have a doctorate. You've obviously achieved incredible academic success. Why didn't they know? Why didn't they tell me? I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the desk. That, Miss Whitmore, is a question you should ask them. But I suspect the answer has more to do with their preconceptions than with my career choices.
The weight of revelation settled over her. I watched as she began to piece together the contradictions. Her family's dismissive attitude toward me, their certainty that she was the first real academic achiever, their confidence that I could provide illicit assistance precisely because they assumed I held a powerless position. They think you're... she began, then stopped, unwilling to voice the cruel assumptions. Intellectually limited? Professionally unsuccessful? Academically inferior? I supplied. Yes, they do. They have for 32 years. But why? How could they not know what you do for a living? Because they never asked. Because they decided early in my life that I lacked the intelligence for complex thinking, and they've spent decades finding evidence to support that conclusion while ignoring anything that contradicted it. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder, my personal portfolio that I kept for annual reviews and promotion considerations. Would you like to see what academic distinction actually looks like, Miss Whitmore? I spread the contents across my desk methodically, my doctoral diploma from Yale, my postdoctoral certificates from Oxford and Cambridge, my appointment letters from 3 different universities, my curriculum vitae listing dozens of published papers and book chapters, photographs from international conferences where I delivered keynote addresses, and letters of recommendation from Nobel laureates and university presidents. Camilla stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. This is all yours? Every degree, every publication, every achievement. I pointed to a recent photograph of me addressing the International Council on Higher Education. That's from last month's conference in Geneva, where I presented research on innovative pedagogical frameworks. The paper I delivered there will be published in next quarter's Journal of Educational Policy. She picked up one of my books, a 400-page academic text on modern university administration that had become required reading in graduate education programs across the country. Her fingers traced the author's name as if confirming its reality. The family thinks you're stupid, but you're actually brilliant. Intelligence isn't the relevant factor here, Miss Whitmore. What matters is that they constructed a narrative about my capabilities that served their psychological needs, and they maintained that narrative despite contradictory evidence. What do you mean? I gathered the documents and returned them to their folder. Your grandmother needed to feel superior to someone in the family. Your mother and uncle needed to be the smart ones by comparison. They needed me to be the failure so they could be the successes. My actual achievements threatened that dynamic, so they simply didn't see them. Camilla sat in stunned silence, processing implications that extended far beyond her own university experience. If they were wrong about you, she said slowly, what else might they be wrong about? That's a question you'll need to answer for yourself. But let me ask you this. Given what you now know about my position here, do you still want to proceed with your original request for special treatment? The blood drained from her face again. Oh God, no, absolutely not. I'm so sorry. I had no idea what I was asking. And if you had known from the beginning that I was the Dean of Advanced Studies, I would have been terrified to even meet with you, let alone ask for favors. So your willingness to request academic fraud was entirely dependent on your perception of my powerlessness. The stark truth of it hung in the air between us. Camilla had been perfectly comfortable asking someone she perceived as inferior to compromise their integrity for her benefit, but the same request directed towards someone with authority was unthinkable. I need you to understand something. Your academic success or failure at this university will be determined entirely by your own effort and ability. No family connections, no special accommodations, no insider advantages. You will succeed or fail on exactly the same terms as every other student. I understand, she said quickly. I don't want any special treatment. I just want to prove that I belong here. Do you belong here, Miss Whitmore? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? Your academic credentials are adequate for admission, but not exceptional. Your family has convinced you that you're brilliant, but your actual performance suggests you're an average student with good support systems. Can you succeed at Thornfield without the advantages you came here expecting to receive? It was a harsh question, but a necessary one. Camilla's entire self-concept had been built on familial praise rather than objective achievement. She needed to confront the gap between her perceived abilities and her actual preparation. I don't know, she admitted, and for the first time since entering my office, her voice carried genuine honesty rather than performative confidence. I think I can, but I'm scared that maybe my family was wrong about how smart I am. Intelligence matters less than effort, but effort requires humility, persistence, and the willingness to fail and try again. Are you prepared for that kind of work? Yes, she said, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. I want to earn whatever I achieve here.
I nodded and made a note in her file. Then we have a foundation to work with. Your first assignment, Miss Whitmore, is to have a conversation with your family about what happened in this meeting. I'm curious to see how they respond when they learn the truth about my position here. You want me to tell them you're a dean? I want you to tell them everything about your assumptions, about your requests, about what you've learned today. And then I want you to observe their reactions very carefully. What do you think they'll do? I smiled for the first time since she'd entered my office, but it wasn't a warm expression. I suspect they'll call me very soon to have a conversation of their own. The call came at 6:47 p.m. on Tuesday evening, barely 24 hours after my meeting with Camilla. I was in my home office reviewing budget proposals for the new graduate research facility when my personal phone rang with a number I recognized immediately. Beatrice? Mother's voice carried an unusual tension, carefully controlled but audibly strained. Could you possibly come by the house tonight? We need to discuss something important about Camilla's university situation. The phrasing was telling. Not family dinner or quick visit. This was a summons disguised as a request, with the kind of urgency that suggested damage control rather than social interaction. What kind of university situation? I asked, though I knew exactly what conversation awaited me. Well, Camilla came home yesterday quite upset about some misunderstanding during her campus visit. She seems to have gotten confused about protocols and procedures. We thought it might be helpful if the family could clarify things together. Misunderstanding, confused about protocols. The euphemisms were almost artistic in their deflection. Camilla had clearly delivered some version of yesterday's revelation, but Mother was framing it as a simple miscommunication rather than a fundamental exposure of family delusions. I see. Will everyone be there? Oh yes, the whole family. We're all very concerned about making sure Camilla gets off to the right start at Thornfield, 7 o'clock, if that works for you. I agreed, and spent the drive to Millbrook Heights considering what version of events I might encounter. Had Camilla told them the complete truth about my position and their assumptions? Had she revealed her requests for academic fraud? Or had she crafted a sanitized narrative that preserved everyone's dignity while avoiding uncomfortable revelations? The Whitmore family home felt different when I arrived. The same physical space, but charged with an energy that hadn't been present Saturday night. Through the front window, I could see figures moving in the living room with the restless agitation of people preparing for battle. Delphine answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Beatrice, thank you so much for coming on short notice. We're all in the living room. The scene that greeted me was carefully orchestrated. Mother sat in her usual chair, hands folded with practiced composure. Garrison occupied the couch with his arms crossed, his expression somewhere between skepticism and annoyance. Priscilla perched on the edge of a side chair, clearly uncomfortable with whatever conversation was about to unfold. And Camilla sat in the corner looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Please sit down, Mother said, gesturing to the chair I'd occupied during Saturday's dinner. We wanted to talk about Camilla's meeting with someone at the university yesterday. The careful phrasing continued, not with you, but with someone, as if my identity in the situation remained somehow uncertain or negotiable. Camilla, Mother continued, why don't you tell Aunt Beatrice what happened during your campus visit? My niece looked up at me with an expression that mingled apology with desperate pleading. She clearly wanted me to understand that whatever she was about to say had been carefully edited for family consumption. I went to meet with someone in the administration office. I thought it was going to be a casual conversation about getting settled at the university, but it turned out to be much more formal than I expected. Formal how? Delphine prompted, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. The person I met with was very concerned about academic integrity policies. They seemed to think I was asking for inappropriate favors or special treatment. Garrison leaned forward with obvious irritation. What kind of favors? You were just asking for basic guidance about navigating the university system.
That's exactly what we don't understand, Mother added, her voice carrying that familiar note of protective indignation. Surely family members helping each other isn't considered inappropriate by any reasonable standard. I remained silent, watching this carefully choreographed performance. They were trying to reframe the entire situation, transforming Camilla's requests for academic fraud into innocent family assistance, and my response into bureaucratic overreach. The thing is, Camilla continued, trying to find the right words, clearly struggling, the person I met with has a lot more authority than we realized. They're actually in charge of academic standards for the whole university. The admission hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I watched each family member process this information, their expressions shifting as implications became clear. More authority how? Priscilla asked.
They're a dean, Camilla said simply. Dr. Beatrice Ashford, Dean of Advanced Studies. The silence that followed was profound. Not the comfortable quiet of family togetherness, but the stunned absence of sound that occurs when fundamental assumptions suddenly collapse. Garrison was the first to speak, his voice carefully controlled. Dean Ashford, that's quite a coincidence, isn't it? Someone with the same name as Beatrice, working at the same university. The denial was almost touching in its desperation. Even faced with direct evidence, he was searching for explanations that preserved their existing narrative about my capabilities. It's not a coincidence, Camilla said quietly. It's Aunt Beatrice. She's the dean. Mother's face went through a remarkable series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, calculation, and finally, a kind of rigid composure that suggested she was trying to maintain control over a rapidly deteriorating situation. I think there must be some mistake, she said finally. Beatrice works in administration, yes, but surely not at that level. Camilla, are you certain you understood correctly? I saw her diplomas, her office, her business cards. She has a PhD from Yale and another degree from Oxford. She's written books and given speeches at international conferences. Each fact landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples of cognitive dissonance. Delphine's response was swift and defensive. Well, if that's true, why didn't she ever tell us? Why would someone hide such significant achievements from their own family? The question was posed as an accusation, as if my alleged deception was more problematic than their decades of dismissal and condescension. Maybe, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since arriving, because I learned early that my achievements weren't welcome here. All eyes turned to me with varying degrees of shock, guilt, and defensive anger. I had remained silent through their entire performance, allowing them to construct whatever narrative they needed to process Camilla's revelations. But that silence was over. What do you mean, not welcome? Mother asked, her voice tight with indignation. We've always been supportive of your endeavors. Have you? I asked, my tone conversational but pointed. When I announced I was applying to graduate school, what was your response? The question caught her off guard. We were concerned about your ability to handle such demanding coursework. When I completed my master's degree, what was your reaction? Silence. When I was offered my first university position, when I published my first research paper, when I received my doctoral degree, what was the family's response to any of those achievements? The silence stretched longer this time, filled with the weight of memories they had apparently dismissed or forgotten entirely. We were proud, Garrison said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Were you? Because what I remember is a family that treated each of my achievements as either impossible or irrelevant. A family that continued to speak to me like I was intellectually disabled, even as I earned advanced degrees and professional recognition.
That's not fair, Delphine protested. We never said you were intellectually disabled. You didn't use those words, but your behavior made your assumptions clear. Saturday night, you discussed my career as if I were a filing clerk. You spoke about academic concepts in my presence as if they were beyond my comprehension. You made jokes about my inability to understand complex thinking. The accusations hung in the air, each one backed by decades of accumulated evidence. I watched their faces cycle through emotions, denial, guilt, defensive anger, and something that might have been the beginning of recognition. If we misunderstood your position, Mother said carefully, it's only because you never corrected us. You never explained what you actually did for work. I tried many times, but you had already decided what I was capable of, and contradictory evidence didn't fit your narrative. That's ridiculous, Garrison said, his voice rising with frustration. If you're really some high-powered academic administrator, why would you hide it? Why wouldn't you want your family to know about your success? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had introduced me to his friends as the space cadet for 20 years, who had just spent the last 10 minutes trying to deny the evidence of my achievements, even when presented with undeniable proof. Because, I said simply, I learned that your need to feel superior to me was more important than celebrating my actual achievements. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. The room fell silent again, but this time the quiet was heavy with recognition rather than denial. The truth settled over the room like a heavy blanket, smothering the comfortable fiction they had maintained for 3 decades. I watched each family member grapple with the cognitive dissonance, their long-held beliefs about my intellectual limitations crashing against the undeniable evidence of my academic achievements. Mother was the first to attempt damage control, her voice taking on that familiar tone of reasonable authority she used when trying to reshape uncomfortable realities. Well, this is certainly unexpected, but I think we're getting sidetracked from the real issue here. Camilla needs guidance navigating her first year at university, and family should help family regardless of professional complications. The phrase professional complications was masterful in its deflection. She was reframing my position as dean not as evidence of my capabilities, but as an obstacle to proper family functioning.
Exactly, Garrison agreed, seizing on Mother's lead. So what if Beatrice has some fancy title? She's still family, and family takes care of each other. It's not about the title, I said evenly. It's about what Camilla asked me to do. Which was what exactly? Delphine demanded, her voice sharp with defensive suspicion. Camilla said there was some misunderstanding about academic policies, but surely you're not suggesting she did anything inappropriate. I looked at Camilla, who had gone pale at the direction of the conversation. She gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head, a plea for me not to reveal the full extent of her requests. But this conversation was no longer about protecting her. It was about exposing the moral framework that had created her expectations in the first place. Camilla asked me to provide her with advance copies of syllabi and assignment descriptions before they were distributed to other students, I said matter-of-factly. She requested assistance arranging housing accommodations she hadn't earned through the normal merit-based process. She wanted guidance on which professors to avoid and how to appeal grades she hadn't yet received. The specificity of the accusations landed like hammer blows. Each family member's face registered a different stage of processing, from initial denial to growing understanding of the implications. "Those don't sound like inappropriate requests," Priscilla said weakly. "They sound like the kind of help any aunt would provide. Any aunt who was willing to commit academic fraud for her niece's benefit," I corrected. "Any aunt who is willing to violate university policies and risk her career to give one student unfair advantages over every other freshman." "Academic fraud?" Mother's voice rose with indignation. "That's a very serious accusation, Beatrice. Surely you're being overly dramatic." "Am I?"
Let me explain what those requests actually entail. I stood and moved to the window, partly to give myself space to think and partly to command the room's attention. Providing syllabi before they're officially distributed violates faculty intellectual property policies and gives students unfair preparation advantages. Manipulating housing assignments based on personal relationships constitutes abuse of administrative authority. Coaching students on grade appeals before they've earned grades suggests premeditated academic dishonesty. Each explanation was delivered with the clinical precision I used in disciplinary hearings. The family listened with growing discomfort as I translated their innocent requests into the language of institutional policy violations. But surely, Delphine pressed, there's some gray area here, some flexibility for special circumstances. What special circumstances? I asked. Camilla's academic credentials are perfectly adequate for admission, but not exceptional. Her financial situation doesn't warrant need-based accommodations. Her only special circumstance is being related to a university administrator, which is exactly the kind of nepotism that academic institutions are designed to prevent. Nepotism? Garrison stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. Jesus Christ, Beatrice, she's your niece. When did helping family become a crime? When it involves violating professional ethics and institutional integrity, I replied calmly. When it requires treating some students as more deserving than others based solely on their family connections. This is insane, he continued, pacing now with agitated energy. You're talking like we asked you to change her grades or forge documents. We just wanted some basic guidance. You wanted me to risk my career to give your daughter advantages she hadn't earned, and you assumed I would do it because you believed I held a powerless position where such violations would be both possible and consequence-free. The accusation hit its mark. Garrison stopped pacing, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to formulate a response that didn't confirm my assessment of their assumptions. That's not... We didn't think... He trailed off as the logic trap became apparent. You didn't think what? That I had professional standards? That I might value my integrity over your convenience? Or you simply didn't think my position was important enough for violations to matter? Mother intervened before Garrison could dig himself deeper. I think we're all getting a bit overwrought here. Surely we can discuss this like rational adults. Rational adults, I repeated. Is it rational to ask a university administrator to commit fraud? Is it rational to assume that family relationships supersede professional ethics? Is it rational to maintain for 30 years that someone lacks intelligence while simultaneously expecting them to navigate complex institutional systems for your benefit? We never said you lacked intelligence, Delphine protested, but her voice carried no conviction. Didn't you? Saturday night, you worried that Camilla's academic reputation might be damaged by association with me. You discussed my supposed inability to understand financial concepts. You made jokes about my intellectual limitations for the entertainment of your guests. We were just... Delphine faltered, unable to complete the sentence without admitting the cruelty of their behavior. You were just expressing your genuine beliefs about my capabilities, I finished. Beliefs that apparently persisted even after I'd spent 12 years working at one of the state's most prestigious universities. Camilla, who had remained silent through this exchange, suddenly spoke up. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what I was asking. I thought... She stopped, tears forming in her eyes. What did you think, Camilla? I asked gently.
I thought you were just, support staff. Someone who could bend little rules without it being a big deal. I never would have asked if I'd known you were important. The honesty in her response was both refreshing and devastating. She was articulating exactly what the entire family had assumed, that my perceived unimportance made their requests acceptable, that only people with real authority deserved professional respect. And if I had been support staff, I pressed, would that have made the requests appropriate? Camilla's face crumpled as she grappled with the moral implications. No. No, it wouldn't have been right either way. But you felt comfortable making those requests because you believed I was powerless to refuse them, or too unimportant for the consequences to matter. Yes, she whispered, the admission barely audible. I turned back to the rest of the family, all of whom were studiously avoiding eye contact. This is the worldview you taught her. That people in service positions exist to be exploited, that family connections justify ethical violations, that success can be purchased through insider access rather than earned through merit. That's not what we taught her, Mother said defensively. Isn't it? What lesson was she supposed to learn from watching you treat me as intellectually inferior for 30 years? What message did she receive when you celebrated her as the family's first real academic achiever? What example did you set when you asked me to use my position to benefit her illegally? The questions hung in the air unanswered, each one exposing another layer of the moral framework that had shaped Camilla's expectations and justified their own behavior. "We're proud of your achievements," Garrison said suddenly, his voice strained with the effort of sincerity. "We've always been. Maybe we didn't express it well, but we've always wanted you to succeed." I looked at him with something approaching pity. Have you? Because what I remember is a family that couldn't acknowledge my success even when it was directly benefiting them. A family that preferred to maintain comfortable lies rather than confront uncomfortable truths. "So, what happens now?" Delphine asked, her voice small and uncertain. "What are you going to do about Camilla's situation at the university?" The question revealed their continuing focus on damage control rather than genuine understanding. Even faced with evidence of their decades-long misjudgment, their primary concern remained protecting their own interests. "What I am going to do," I said, "is ensure that Camilla receives exactly the same treatment as every other Thornfield University student. No special favors, no family accommodations, no advantages based on our relationship." "And if she struggles?" Mother asked. "If she needs help?" "Then she'll have access to the same academic support services, tutoring programs, and counseling resources available to all students. She'll succeed or fail based on her own effort and ability, just like everyone else." "That seems harsh," Priscilla ventured. "It seems fair," I corrected. "It's what every other family hopes their children will receive. Equal treatment based on merit rather than connections." The conversation was winding down, but I wasn't finished yet. There was one more revelation that needed to occur, one more assumption that required correction. "There's something else you should know," I said, my voice carrying the weight of 30 years of accumulated frustration. "Something that might help you understand why your assumptions about my capabilities have been so particularly painful." They looked up with varying degrees of curiosity and apprehension, sensing that another foundation was about to shift beneath their feet. "I didn't stumble into my position through luck or affirmative action or institutional charity. I earned it through academic achievement that has been recognized internationally. And every step of that journey was accomplished while listening to my own family dismiss my intelligence and minimize my potential." The admission I had just made settled over the room like a challenge, daring them to continue their decades-long pattern of dismissal. But instead of the immediate defensive responses I expected, something different happened. Mother's face went through a series of micro-expressions: confusion, calculation, and then what looked disturbingly like strategic recalibration. "Well," she said after a long pause, her voice taking on a tone I recognized from childhood negotiations, "this certainly changes things, doesn't it? We had no idea you'd achieved such a distinction in your field." The word choice was telling. Not success
or excellence, but distinction, as if my achievements were notable primarily for their unexpectedness rather than their merit. It does change things, Garrison agreed. But his expression had shifted into something that made my stomach clench with familiar dread. "What do you mean?" Camilla asked, though something in her voice suggested she was beginning to understand the direction of the conversation. "Well," Delphine said, leaning forward with renewed energy, "if Aunt Beatrice is in such a powerful position at the university, surely that's actually wonderful news for your academic future. Think of the doors that could open, the opportunities that might become available."
I felt the blood drain from my face as I watched them perform this psychological pivot in real time. Instead of processing the implications of their decades-long misjudgment, instead of grappling with the cruelty of their assumptions, they were immediately calculating how to exploit my actual position for their benefit. "That's not how this works," I said sharply, but Mother was already building momentum. "Of course it is, dear. Family connections are how the world operates. Now that we understand your real influence at Thornfield, we can have much more productive conversations about Camilla's future." "Productive conversations about what exactly?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Well, research opportunities, for instance," Mother continued, her voice brightening with each word. "Surely someone in your position could arrange for Camilla to work on important projects, build her resume with meaningful academic experiences." "Graduate school recommendations," Priscilla added enthusiastically. "When the time comes, having a dean's endorsement would be incredibly valuable." "Honor Society nominations," Garrison chimed in. "Academic awards. Maybe even study abroad programs that might otherwise be out of reach." They were doing it again. Not asking me to violate policies this time, but to leverage my position for preferential treatment disguised as legitimate opportunities. They had learned nothing from the previous conversation except that their simple sister was actually a powerful ally they had been underutilizing. "You're missing the point entirely," I said, my voice rising with frustration. "Are we?" Delphine asked, her tone suggesting I was the one failing to understand. "Look, we made some mistakes about your career situation. We can admit that. But that's in the past now. What matters is how we move forward as a family." "Move forward how?" "By supporting each other appropriately," Mother explained, with the patience of someone clarifying the obvious. "You help Camilla succeed at university, and she brings honor to the family name. Everyone benefits." The calculation was breathtaking in its shamelessness. They had spent less than 30 minutes processing the revelation of my actual achievements before transforming it into a strategy for exploiting my position. "What about honor?" I asked quietly. "What about integrity? What about the possibility that Camilla might succeed on her own merit without family manipulation?" "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Garrison said dismissively. "Every successful person uses their connections. That's how the world works. The fact that you're in a position to help family is something to celebrate, not something to feel guilty about." "And it's not like we're asking you to do anything unethical," Delphine added. "We're talking about legitimate opportunities that would be available to any qualified student. You'd just be making sure Camilla gets considered for them." The rationalization was expertly constructed. They were reframing nepotism as networking, preferential treatment as proper advocacy, and corruption as family loyalty. "Let me be very clear about something," I said, standing up with sudden resolution. "I will not use my position to provide Camilla with opportunities she hasn't earned. I will not recommend her for programs she's not qualified for. I will not manipulate the system to benefit our family." "But why not?" Camilla asked, her voice carrying genuine confusion. "If you have the power to help me, why wouldn't you? Isn't that what family does for each other?" The question revealed how completely they had missed the moral dimension of the situation. In their worldview, power existed to be used for personal advantage, and family relationships created obligations to share those advantages regardless of merit or fairness. Because using institutional authority for personal benefit is corruption. Because giving you unearned advantages means denying them to more deserving students.
Because integrity matters more than convenience. Integrity, Mother repeated, her voice taking on a dismissive edge. That's a very noble sentiment, dear, but it's also rather naive. The world doesn't operate on abstract principles. It operates on relationships and mutual assistance. And what about the relationship between aunt and niece? Doesn't that create some obligation, some natural inclination to help families succeed? It creates an obligation to be honest about what success requires, to provide guidance, encouragement, and support for legitimate efforts. It doesn't create an obligation to circumvent merit-based systems. But that's exactly what people in your position do all the time, Delphine insisted. University administrators help their families navigate the system. It's practically expected. By whom? I asked. By people who believe that fairness is less important than personal advantage? By families who think their children deserve special treatment based on bloodlines rather than achievement? The conversation was taking on a surreal quality. They were arguing passionately for their right to my corruption, as if my refusal to abuse my position constituted a betrayal of family loyalty. Look, Priscilla said, attempting a conciliatory tone, maybe we're approaching this wrong. Maybe instead of thinking about specific favors, we should think about this as mentorship? Professional guidance from someone who understands the university system. It was a clever reframing, but it revealed their persistent refusal to accept that my relationship with Camilla needed to operate within the same ethical boundaries that governed my relationships with all students. Mentorship is available to every student through official programs. If Camilla wants guidance, she can participate in those programs like everyone else. But surely family mentorship would be more personalized, more effective because of the personal investment involved.
More effective at what? At teaching her that merit doesn't matter as long as you have connections? At preparing her for a professional world where she expects special treatment based on family relationships? At helping her succeed? Garrison exploded, his patience finally exhausted. Jesus, Beatrice, when did you become so rigid, so unwilling to help the people who love you? The accusation of rigidity was particularly galling coming from someone who had spent 30 years dismissing my capabilities. But it also revealed the fundamental disconnect in our worldviews. They saw my ethical standards as obstacles to overcome, while I saw them as the foundation of professional integrity. I've always been willing to help people I love, I said evenly, but helping someone doesn't mean enabling their worst impulses or corrupting the systems that ensure fairness for everyone. Fairness, Delphine scoffed. The world isn't fair, Beatrice. Some people are born with advantages, some people create advantages, and some people waste the advantages they're given. Camilla has the advantage of having a dean in the family. Why shouldn't she use it? Because it's not her advantage. It's mine, and I earned it through work that had nothing to do with her or any of you. The silence that followed was heavy with resentment. I could see them processing this distinction, the idea that my achievements belonged to me, rather than to the family collective, that my position carried obligations to the institution rather than to our genetic relationships. So that's it then, Mother? Asked, her voice cold with disappointment. You're going to abandon your family because of some abstract principle about professional ethics? I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm refusing to corrupt myself for your benefit. There's a difference. Is there? Camilla asked, tears forming in her eyes again. Because from where I sit, it feels like you're choosing your job over your family. The accusation was expertly deployed, the young, vulnerable family member expressing hurt at my unwillingness to sacrifice my integrity for her advancement. But I had seen this performance too many times to be moved by it. I'm choosing to maintain the standards that earned me the position you want me to abuse. I'm choosing to preserve the integrity that makes my recommendations valuable in the first place. And if that means Camilla struggles, Garrison demanded, if that means she fails because she doesn't have the advantages other students might have, then she'll learn what every successful person learns eventually, that achievement requires effort, that respect must be earned,
And that real success comes from developing capabilities rather than exploiting connections. The lesson was one they desperately needed to hear, but I could see in their faces that they weren't ready to learn it yet. The standoff in the living room had reached an impasse, with my family's expectations crashing against my professional boundaries like waves against stone. But what happened next transformed the entire dynamic in a way none of us had anticipated. Camilla's phone buzzed with a notification, and as she glanced at the screen, her face went pale. "Oh no," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is it?" Delphine asked, immediately alert to her daughter's distress. It's a group chat from some of the other incoming freshmen. Someone shared a video." Camilla Hand's hands shook as she held up her phone. "It's from our dinner Saturday night." The blood drained from every face in the room. Douglas, Mother's banking colleague with the presumptuous financial advice, had apparently been more active on social media than anyone realized. "What kind of video?" Mother demanded, reaching for the phone. Camilla reluctantly handed it over, and we all watched in horrified fascination as Saturday night's dinner unfolded on the small screen. Douglas had clearly been recording snippets throughout the evening, creating what he probably thought was a charming documentation of family celebration. But viewed through the lens of current knowledge, the footage was devastating. There was Garrison introducing me to the group as my sister, the space cadet. There was the silver-haired woman asking if I worked in cafeteria services or facilities management. There was the extended conversation about my supposed intellectual limitations, with Douglas's slow explanation of municipal bonds as if I were a child. Most damaging of all was a clear recording of Delphine's toast, "A Whitmore finally cracking the Ivy League," followed by the enthusiastic agreement that this represented the family's first real academic achievement. "How many people have seen this?" I asked quietly. Camilla's face was ashen. "It's been shared in 3 different freshman group chats. There are over 200 incoming freshmen in those groups." The implications were staggering. In less than 48 hours, hundreds of incoming Thornfield students had watched a video of my own family publicly mocking my intelligence and dismissing my professional achievements. Achievements that placed me in direct authority over their academic careers. "We need to get that video taken down immediately," Mother said, her voice sharp with panic. "It's too late," Camilla replied miserably. "People have already downloaded it. Some of them are making reaction videos." She showed us her phone again, this time displaying a response video from a confident-looking young man with perfectly styled hair. "So, apparently Dean Ashford's own family thinks she's stupid? That's the person who's going to be overseeing our academic standards? Someone whose family doesn't even respect her intelligence?"
Another video, this one from a young woman with multiple piercings and purple hair. This is actually hilarious. Imagine being so successful that your family still treats you like you're intellectually disabled. The cognitive dissonance is unreal. A third clip showed a group of students analyzing the footage. Did you see how they talked about her little teaching job? She's literally a dean with a PhD from Yale, and they're treating her like she files papers for a living. The viral momentum was building with terrifying speed. What had started as Douglas's innocent social media documentation was becoming a case study in family dysfunction, with me as the unwitting protagonist. "This is a disaster," Garrison muttered, running his hands through his hair. "My hardware store customers are going to see this. My employees, everyone I work with." "Your hardware store?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "That's your primary concern right now?" "Well, what about the bank?" Delphine added frantically. "What about my professional reputation? What are my colleagues going to think when they see when they realize we—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. They were worried about how their public humiliation of me would reflect on their own professional standing. "Maybe we can explain," Priscilla suggested desperately. "Maybe we can post our own video clarifying that it was all a misunderstanding." "Clarifying what exactly?"
That you've spent 30 years treating me like I was intellectually disabled despite my academic achievements? That you celebrated Camilla as the family's first real scholar while I held a doctorate from Yale? That you asked me to commit academic fraud because you assumed I was powerless to refuse? Each question hit like a physical blow. The viral video had exposed not just their ignorance about my career, but the fundamental cruelty of their family dynamics. Camilla's phone buzzed again. "There's more," she said with growing horror. "Someone found your university bio page. They're posting screenshots of your publications, your degrees, your conference presentations." The contrast was becoming starker by the minute. On one side, video evidence of my family's dismissive treatment. On the other, documentary proof of my actual achievements. The internet was drawing its own conclusions about the disconnect between perception and reality. "Look at this thread," Camilla continued, scrolling through responses. Someone wrote, "This is what internalized misogyny looks like, a family so threatened by a woman's success that they literally refuse to acknowledge it exists." And this one, "Imagine having a dean in your family and treating her like she's too stupid to understand basic concepts. The secondhand embarrassment is killing me." This person says, "Dr. Ashford's research on educational equity is literally taught in graduate programs nationwide, and her own family thinks she's incompetent. The irony is suffocating." The viral phenomenon was taking on a life of its own, with social media users analyzing our family dynamics with the intensity of amateur psychologists. Some responses were sympathetic to me, others were simply entertained by the absurdity, but all of them were documenting the spectacular disconnect between perception and reality. "We have to do something," Mother said, her voice rising toward panic. "We have to control this narrative before it gets completely out of hand." "Control it how?" I asked. "By posting a response video where you explain that you've always known I was successful, but chose to mock my intelligence for entertainment? By clarifying that your celebration of Camilla's real academic achievement was just a joke?" "There has to be something," Garrison insisted. "Some way to explain this that doesn't make us look like people who spent 30 years psychologically abusing a family member because her success threatened your self-image?" I finished, like people who were so invested in their own superiority that they literally couldn't see evidence of academic achievement happening right in front of them. The viral momentum was accelerating beyond anything we could imagine. Students were creating hashtags, hashtag Deangate, hashtag family gaslighting, hashtag academic irony. The story was being picked up by education blogs, social justice accounts, and even some mainstream news outlets. "This is going to affect the university," Delphine said suddenly, her voice sharp with accusation. "This kind of negative publicity could damage Thornfield's reputation." "Could it?" I asked. "Or might it actually demonstrate that the university employs administrators who maintain their professional integrity even when their own families try to pressure them into corruption?" The question hung in the air as they processed this alternative interpretation. The viral story wasn't necessarily damaging to me or to Thornfield. It was damaging to them. "Oh God," Camilla whispered, staring at her phone. "Someone just posted a compilation video. It's got the family dinner footage edited together with clips from your conference presentations and interviews. The contrast is..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. But I could imagine the devastating effect of such a compilation. My family's mockery juxtaposed with evidence of my actual scholarly work. Their assumptions about my capabilities contrasted with video of me addressing international academic audiences. "How many views?" Priscilla asked weakly. "The main video has over 50,000 views, and it's accelerating. The compilation video has 20,000 in just the last hour." The scope of the exposure was beyond anything we could contain or control. Within a matter of hours, our family's private dysfunction had become public entertainment, and I had unwittingly become the protagonist in a viral story about academic achievement, family relationships, and the psychology of denial.
What do we do now? Mother asked, her voice small and defeated. I looked around the room at these people who had shaped my understanding of my own worth for 3 decades, who had convinced me that my achievements were either impossible or irrelevant, who had just spent the evening trying to pressure me into corruption while simultaneously going viral for mocking my intelligence. Now, I said quietly, you learn what it feels like when your assumptions about someone are exposed to public scrutiny. You experience what it's like when your private cruelty becomes public knowledge. You discover what happens when the story you've told yourselves about superiority and intelligence gets examined by people who can see the evidence you've been ignoring. The viral phenomenon was no longer just about family dynamics. It had become a case study in institutional integrity, professional achievement, and the psychology of recognition. And I was no longer just their disappointing family member. I was the central figure in a story that thousands of people were following with fascination. The tables had turned completely, and this time there was no controlling the narrative. 3 months later, I sat in my office reviewing applications for Thornfield University's new Academic Integrity Initiative, a program that had emerged directly from the viral phenomenon my family had inadvertently created. The irony wasn't lost on me that their attempt to pressure me into corruption had ultimately led to enhanced protections against exactly that kind of institutional abuse. The aftermath of what social media had dubbed Deangate had been swift and transformative. Within a week of the video going viral, I had received interview requests from education journalists, invitations to speak at conferences on academic ethics, and collaboration offers from researchers studying family dynamics and professional achievement. The story had resonated far beyond its entertainment value, sparking serious conversations about nepotism in higher education and the psychology of intellectual recognition. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Dr. Garrison from the Chronicle of Higher Education is here for your 2:00 interview. The Chronicle piece would be the capstone of the media attention, a serious academic publications analysis of how viral social media could actually strengthen institutional integrity rather than undermine it. But first, I had one more conversation to conclude. Camilla sat across from my desk, her posture dramatically different from that first day 3 months ago. Gone was the entitled confidence of someone expecting family favors. In its place was the careful respect of a student who had learned that academic success required genuine effort. "How are your midterm grades?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from her academic file. 3 Bs and 1 B+, she replied with quiet pride, all earned honestly. "And how does that feel?" She considered the question seriously. "Scary at first. I kept waiting for professors to grade me harder because of, everything that happened. But they didn't. They just graded my work like everyone else's. Which is exactly what should happen." "I know that now." She paused, fidgeting with her pen. "I wanted to thank you for not giving me special treatment, for forcing me to actually learn how to study and work for my grades." The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Stripped of expectations for family assistance and faced with the reality of her academic preparation, Camilla had initially struggled. Her first month at Thornfield had included visits to tutoring centers, study groups, and academic support services, the same resources available to every student, but one she had never expected to need. "How are things with your family?" I asked, shifting to practical matters. Camilla's expression darkened slightly. "Complicated. Mom and Uncle Garrison are still embarrassed about the whole thing. Grandmother keeps insisting that it was all just a big misunderstanding, that they always knew you were successful. And what do you think?" "I think they're rewriting history because the truth is too uncomfortable." She met my eyes directly. "I think they spent so long needing to feel superior to someone that they couldn't see what was right in front of them." The insight was mature beyond her 19 years old, born from her own painful recognition of how family narratives had shaped her expectations and moral framework. "The weirdest part is that now they want to brag about you. Mom keeps posting articles about your speaking engagements and trying to claim credit for your success. It's like they've completely forgotten how they used to talk about you." The selective memory wasn't surprising. Cognitive dissonance was a powerful force, and it was easier for them to reframe their past behavior than to genuinely confront it. but Camilla's ability to see through their revisionism suggested that at least one member of the family had learned something valuable from the experience. "Have you given any thought to your major declaration?" I asked, shifting to practical matters. "I'm thinking about psychology, actually, with a focus on family systems and educational dynamics." She smiled ruefully. "Turns out I have some personal experience with those topics." The choice was fitting. Her own experience with family dysfunction and academic pressure had given her insights that could benefit other students facing similar challenges. Patricia knocked and entered. "Dean Ashward, your interview appointment is here."
Thank you. Send Dr. Harrison in. I turned to Camilla. We should wrap up, but I want you to know that I'm proud of the work you've done this semester. The honest work. Thank you, Dr. Ashford. The formal address was intentional, a recognition that our professional relationship had to exist separately from our family connection. Dr. Harrison, from the Chronicle, was a distinguished woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She settled into the chair Camilla had vacated and immediately pulled out a digital recorder. Dr. Ashford, thank you for agreeing to this interview. I have to say, your story has generated more reader response than anything we've published this year. I imagine it has, though I never intended to become a case study in family dysfunction. Yet that's exactly what happened, and the implications extend far beyond your personal situation. We've received dozens of letters from other academics describing similar experiences. Family members who dismiss their achievements, colleagues who face nepotism pressure, administrators who struggle with competing loyalties. The broader resonance had been one of the most unexpected aspects of the viral phenomenon. My experience wasn't unique. It was apparently representative of patterns that existed throughout higher education. What do you think the viral attention has accomplished? Dr. Harrison asked. Several things, I replied thoughtfully. First, it's created conversations about academic integrity that might not have happened otherwise. Students are more aware that nepotism exists and more vigilant about fairness. Faculty are discussing the pressures they face to favor certain students. And institutionally, we've implemented new policies here at Thornfield. Clear guidelines about family relationships and potential conflicts of interest, enhanced training for administrators about maintaining professional boundaries, more robust reporting mechanisms for students who suspect unfair treatment. Some critics have argued that your family's treatment of you was a private matter that shouldn't have become public entertainment. It was a fair question, one I'd grappled with myself. Privacy is important, I acknowledged. But when private dysfunction reinforces public inequalities, when family dynamics that devalue achievement create pressure for institutional corruption, then the personal becomes political. How so? My family's assumptions about my capabilities weren't just hurtful, they were based on stereotypes about women in academia, about the value of intellectual work, about who deserves to hold authority. When they tried to pressure me into violating academic standards, they were acting on beliefs that undermine the entire education system. Dr. Harrison nodded, making notes. And now? Now we have a national conversation about these issues. Students are more aware of their rights to fair treatment. Administrators are more conscious of the pressure to compromise. Families are examining their own assumptions about achievement and recognition. What about your relationship with your family? I paused, considering how much personal detail to share. We're working through it. Some relationships can be repaired once harmful patterns are acknowledged. Others may need more time or distance. And Camilla? Camilla is learning what it means to succeed on her own merit. That's the most valuable education she could receive. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering the broader implications of viral social media on institutional accountability, the psychology of family dynamics in academic settings, and the ongoing policy changes that had emerged from the attention. As Dr. Harrison packed up her equipment, she asked one final question. Do you have any regrets about how this all unfolded? I considered the question seriously. I regret that it took a viral video for my family to see me clearly. I regret that other families are probably perpetuating similar dynamics right now.
But I don't regret that the conversation is happening. And professionally? Professionally, this experience has reinforced why academic integrity matters so much. When we compromise standards for personal relationships, we don't just harm individual students, we undermine the entire system that makes higher education valuable. After Dr. Harrison left, I sat alone in my office as afternoon light slanted through the windows. On my desk was a stack of letters from students, faculty, and administrators at universities across the country, sharing their own stories of family pressure, institutional compromise, and the challenge of maintaining integrity in complex professional relationships. The viral phenomenon had ended months ago, but its impact continued to ripple outward. Academic conferences now included sessions on family relationships and professional boundaries. University policies were being rewritten to address conflicts of interest more explicitly. Students were more empowered to report suspected favoritism. Most importantly, the conversation had moved beyond entertainment value to examine fundamental questions about merit, fairness, and the role of personal relationships in professional settings. My personal story had become larger than itself, transformed from family dysfunction into institutional reform. The pain of 30 years of dismissal had been converted into a force for positive change in higher education. That evening, I drove home to my quiet townhouse past the campus where hundreds of students were pursuing their education under enhanced protections against the very corruption my family had once requested. The irony was perfect. Their attempt to exploit my position had ultimately strengthened the systems that prevent such exploitation. Sometimes, I reflected, the best revenge against those who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong, it's transforming their misconceptions into tools for protecting others who might face similar challenges. In the end, my family had been right about one thing. I had finally brought distinction to the Whitmore name, just not in the way they had ever imagined. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.